Ladies and gentlemen, today our episode is a bit different. It's of a short form that I talk to one and only Kanwar Gill about his plurilingual journey. It is a very special episode, and he prepared an excellent show note, which we're going to put up on the podcast page. And I encourage you to take a look at this show note. It is an amazing piece of work. Kanwar himself is an aspiring teacher. He's trying to become a teacher very soon. I mean, in my eyes, he already is. He was born one. But let's hear from him exactly how being a plurilingual, which he's going to explain what it is, helped shape his personality, his identity, as well as how it's going to help him develop his teaching abilities and help him be a better teacher in the years to come. My good friend Kanwar Gill. Enjoy. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and hello, Kanwar. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. I'm doing great. Today we're talking about something super interesting. It's called being a plurilingual. I hope I say that right. Now, what is, or who rather is, a plurilingual?
Right. So, plurilingual in the field of working with people who have different language repertoire. So we are looking at people, for example, who have, in this case, students who have more than one languages that they're fluent in. And these are sometimes known as L1, which stands for your home language. L2, in that case, would be the language you want to learn. And L2 in this example would be, say, for example, the English language. So plurilingual is a person who can move between these different languages. So the idea is that you can think in different languages and have that conversation going on. So it's different than thinking as a multilingual, which is a common notion. Most people think of a multilingual as somebody who knows more than one language, which is true. But a multilingual cannot be treated as two monolinguals in one person, because all the time you are making a switch between languages. You're not having any segregation or separation between the languages at different instances. So plurilingual essentially encompasses that and gives that whole holistic experience and holistic notion of what it really means to know more than one language.
I see. Now, I take it that you yourself know multiple languages. Actually, for a fact, I do know that. So how many languages do you know, and how did you end up learning them?
That's a great question. So I have two mother tongues, Punjabi and Hindi. And both of them are essentially a product of, my parents. They are both Punjabi native speakers, and Hindi was because when I was growing up in India, Hindi is the national language. So we use that for, like school instruction as well, but also you see that in social media, in TV shows, etc. So those two really played a heavy role in my upbringing.
Excellent. And now, which of them do you use most on a regular basis, and which one? And if the other ones, if you use them, in what capacity do you use the other ones?
Right. So let me backtrack a little. So Punjabi is my mother tongue, and the city that I was brought up in, I was born in the city of Chandigarh. Which is in the northern part of India. Right. And it's a pretty big town. It has a population of 1 million people, and that's a 2011 census. So that's pretty much like if you do the math, it's like it's a pretty big city compared to say Toronto.
Yeah.
But also the fact that Punjabi itself has different dialects, right? So there's different dialects. For example, Doaba is one of the common ones, and Malvi is another one, and then there's another one called Puari. And growing up, because I was living in a big city, the dialect that I was speaking was essentially the dialect that was spoken in the city, so it was different than these traditional dialects. that you might hear in small towns. And in a sense, it did bring about socioeconomic differences. So if you hear somebody speaking a certain dialect, you can tell, okay, like what kind of background they have, what kind of education they do. So those things are an essential influence of if you really think about dialects, and sometimes it can influence you if you talk to somebody as well. So for me, really Punjabi was really the main language that I was learning, and then was followed by Hindi.
Right. And now English.
Yes, English.
Obviously, that's a given. Now, you mentioned actually societal impact and cultural impact of these
Mm-hmm.
languages. Now, I want to ask you, how has each of these languages shaped how you see the world, what you think of the world, and how did they collectively help you with your current perspective of the events of the world?
Right. So the cultural impact. So I do have. So Punjabi itself is, it's part of my identity. It's the culture that I'm brought up in, the language that you speak, and then the religion. The Sikh religion, for example, Punjabi is the language of communication. So it's more than just a language. It really defines the way I think and the kind of people that, for example, I associate with when I was growing up. And it really it kind of makes me who I am. And I think this is really key for me. And I think it positions me in a position where I can use this to my advantage when I go, for example, in a school setting where there are different students who have different backgrounds and students who have more than one language, and maybe they are not proficient in English, and they're learning the language, and I could relate with them because I was in their shoes at one point, and I did go through that. The resistance, for example, because I remember when I came to Canada, I had to go through the adjustment period. And that adjustment period, Cummins is a famous author who talks a lot about how to work with students who are learning English. But he's mentioned about the idea of adjustment. So when you do come to a new place, there's what he calls is 4 different stages. And the first stage is where you have the arrival and the first impressions. And that's really where I was when I came here, even as I'm talking about my journey to this country, even though I came here straight from my secondary school, going straight into post-secondary, but there was still some notion I had to learn, the jargon, the conversational jargon that Canadians use, and phrases that they use. And what I figured, and this is what the research says as well, is that the conversational language, you pick it up early. So you watch TV shows, you interact with people, you pick up those way of speaking. So that's not an issue. In the schools, research shows that within 2 years, if a new student comes in, within 2 years, they can have a good conversational command of the language, for example. However, just understanding that can be a false dichotomy, because just now seeing that, okay, as for example, if you put yourself in the shoes of a teacher, you see a student who is learning the language and now is making a good headway in terms of conversing in English. That could give you a false picture, because their academic language might still be falling behind. And when I say academic language, that's really in the field of languages, we talk about dialects, which is, it brings about the notion of socio-economics and, the geographical parts, because a dialect is usually associated with a geographical region. But then we also have something called registers. So registers is what, for example, one register, which is very common, is a conversation that we have. Another most common is the academic. And when I say academic, that really then boils down to what kind of field that is your forte, right? So if you're in the field of mathematics education, your academic language register would be way different than somebody who's in psychology. So you build on those. But as a teacher, you might not realize this. As a teacher, and this applies to me too, going down, but also seeing that, okay, this is it's good that they're learning the conversational language, but for the academic language, they would need support, and you have to be
Mhm.
with them during that time. You can't just see, okay, they are doing good, so I can just take off all the support, because that would be actually detrimental to
Mhm.
their journey in learning English.
Excellent. As you answered my final question before me even asking it, I'm gonna jump to the final bit. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you want to pitch in at this ending stage?
Yes, so I think as a new teacher, it's really important for me to kind of use my own experiences that I had, and again, going back to what I said before, I find that a blessing, because I can use that and really be more empathetic with my students and create an environment in the class which is more safe and inclusive, because in that kind of environment they can take risks. They know that they're not alone. They would not be ridiculed, because I could relate to that notion, because when I was growing up back in India, and then I was in an English medium school, but in the class, the environment was not at all safe. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime you're not speaking in English, you would be scolded or you would be
Mm-hmm.
shut down. Why are you not speaking in English? And I feel that's very negative. It's a deficit thinking, where you're thinking whatever language you're speaking is a deficit. It's not an asset that you possess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you're not using that as a leverage to get the student where you want them to be. So that understanding is important, because I've experienced that, and as a teacher, I would want to make sure that I do not. I'm more mindful of that in the class, but also, with language, there's different ways people learn. There's different theories that we talk about. There's a theory of imitation and habit formation, where you learn by like you, for example, when you interact with your parents or your mother, you learn how to say mama or papa, right? So that's the theory where you learn by imitation, and that was to some extent that has been part of my own journey, learning Punjabi as my mother tongue, but also social interaction. That's another famous theory where now you interact with others and you learn in that process. So in the field of education, this is known as the zone of proximal development.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that you know something, but I'm going to push you a little outside of that zone, but I'm not going to go too far, because at that point you might not feel safe. So I'm going to nudge just a little outside the circle that or the zone that you are comfortable in, and then in that place is where most learning can occur, and also at the same time you are including a challenging aspect to that learning. So it's not just easy, but there is some form of challenge, but also it's not too uncomfortable or too risky for the student.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important for me to also keep in mind, and that's something I want to take with me, making sure those theories of language learning and, really contextualizing that in the classroom, and seeing how, what works, what does not work, and how I can modify my language instruction, how I can use that to my advantage and really use it across the curriculum, not just in literacy, but also in other subject areas like mathematics, science, and so on.
Excellent. I appreciate that your time is limited, so I'm going to let you go. But before I do that, is there anywhere that people can find you, a website or something, perhaps?
So right now, at the moment, I do not have a fully functioning website, but as soon as I have one, I'm thinking of having blog posts where I can share more insights, or, some techniques or strategies that work for me, to share with others, and also learn from others in the process. So as soon as I have that, I will let you know.
Excellent. And we'll have you back again. And thank you for your time today.
Perfect.
And until a later episode, and a great chat with you as you hopefully get your blog post going.
Yes.
We'll have you back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.